How is everybody doing? Day 23 of our husband's boot camp. And now we pivot. We spoke about Rabbi Miller's 10 Commandments of Marriage. We spoke about the 7 principles from Dr. John Gottman. Now we're going to something else. And this is very important. This is from Gary Chapman. It's called The 5 Languages of Love. And he has a premise of his book. Many of you heard of it. It's a very famous book. It's one of the only famous books that I'll actually speak out, because I think the idea of it is very interesting, very true, and very important. See, we talk about a good offense is the best defense. You don't need to block situations. You don't need to deal with your wife complaining, your wife being upset, when you have a good offense, when you constantly are giving in and constantly showing love to your wife. So let's understand a little bit what I mean and what I'm talking about. Okay, we have 2 people, a couple, okay? Sally and David. Sally and David. Sally complains constantly that David is working too much. Sally complains constantly that when David comes home, he's not helping around the house. David's in his own world. He's inattentive. And David says, but what do you mean? I'm not so bad. I come home, she asks me to do something, I do it. And what do you think I'm doing when I'm working? I'm working, I'm a good man. Why is she complaining for? And then I always ask her, could we go out? And she never says she wants to go out. And let's understand something, that like 50 years ago, not even, maybe 30 years ago, this was never a problem. Husbands and wives were very content in their spot. Wife was very happy. Husband came home from work. He was inattentive and was supposed to be inattentive. That's what a husband did. Our fathers came home and helped around the house. That's what they were. Our grandfathers, certainly, they didn't even less. They just sat. So why all of a sudden now are women craving? Women are screaming that husbands should go ahead and be more attentive and help out more with the kids. And they complain about it, they yell about it, and they go crazy. Let me explain to you something, and this is very, very important to understand. Back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, people were more confident. They didn't have questions about whether or not others like them or love them. If he's married to me, obviously loves me. And it didn't take much for a wife to feel secure in the relationship. When a wife complains that the husband doesn't help around the house, I don't know if she really needs his help, or she really wants her husband to show that she really loves her. She's not confident in the fact that he loves her enough to help out. When a wife says, my husband is inattentive, he doesn't show me any attention, I talk to him and his mind is in space, what is she really saying? My husband doesn't love me. My husband doesn't like me. I need his attention. A wife wouldn't need attention so much if she felt confident in the fact that her husband loved her. Plus, if you feel that the person you're with really loves you and really cares for you, it's much easier to forgive a lot of their sins. We all want to be loved. And the person that's giving us that love is the greatest person to us in the world, just by the fact that they're giving us what we crave, the most important thing that we crave, attention and love. So if we're getting it, why would I ever say anything bad about that person? Yeah, every once in a while I may flare up with something, but in general, I keep my mouth quiet, because that person is giving me something that no other person is giving me in the world. No other person can give me. Therefore, Dr. Chapman says that there are different languages and different ways that a person shows love. We once spoke about the tank. Each person's got a tank, an emotional tank that you got to keep feeding, because every once in a while it runs out of gas. Used to be, back in the day, people's tanks were full all the time. People were much, much, much more confident. Society is constantly giving us, and maybe that's a voice note of itself, how society is constantly giving us messages that we're not good enough. And they're destroying our own self-worth. But this is something else. But it used to be people were much more confident. They're not now. And therefore, you got to keep on filling that bank with love. However, here's the problem, is that every single person has a different way that you can tell them. Just saying I love you is kind of empty. Just showing attention sometimes is not really doing it, because each person has their own language, so to speak, of how love is showed and how love manifests. For instance, if I speak French and you speak Spanish and I tell you in French I love you, it's worthless. You're speaking a different language than I am. So Dr. Chapman goes on to speak and say that when each person in their world, from what they grew up with, has a different way of saying, oh, that's love, based on what their parents did. So here's a guy who grew up and his father came home, made sure the bills were paid, but he didn't do a thing around the house. He never heard his father tell his mother, I love you, but everything was taken care of, and his father and mother looked very, very happy. So he attributes, he says, oh, that's love. To show your wife love, you got to make sure the bills are paid. You got to make sure you're hardworking. And that's the way to show love. But she grew up in a home where her father was constantly buying her mother gifts, was constantly taking her mother on vacation. So she says, that's love, you see? Love is when you buy gifts, when you take your spouse on vacation. So her husband is thinking, what do you mean? Of course I love you. Aren't I working? And she's looking at it, well, you never buy me gifts. So there are 5, says Gary Chapman, 5 different ways that we show love to 5 different people. And you have to figure out what is your wife's way of translating love. What's her language of love? And let me tell you something. I agree that each person has a main type, but usually each person has all 5. And you need all 5. So we're going to concentrate on all 5 of those for the next 5 days. One of the last ones is going to be 2 in 1. So let's go. Today we're going to talk about words of affirmation. Words of affirmation. Constant compliments. And constantly saying the words, I love you. Constant compliments and constantly saying the words, I love you. Now remember, compliments have to be given the correct way. We lose sight of what a compliment is. If I tell you, if I go to the bank and I tell the lady who's giving out the money, wow, you got so much money. Wow, it's not a compliment. It's got to do with me. If we compliment a person on something that they don't attribute to anything that has to do with them, it doesn't really help. For instance, if your wife may be, everybody knows that she's a great cook, but she may not look at that like it's such a great thing. You always have to compliment her on her food, but she may not look at it like that's something hard for her. Yeah, I grew up, my mother was a great cook. My grandmother was a great cook. It's in my blood. I learned how to do it. It's easy for me. It's something I work on. But maybe she thinks that her special thing is how calm she is in situations. That when she was a little girl, she used to have a temper, and then she worked on herself. And now when she calms herself down, and you never once told her that it's amazing how calm you are when things around you fall apart. Therefore, you have to, when giving a compliment, you have to go ahead and pick out what it is about your wife that she thinks is special. We spoke about that a little bit when we spoke about Choni HaMa'agel. So let us review. The first language of love that we're going to discuss today is words of affirmation. Constantly telling your wife how special she is, how precious she is, how much you love her all the time. Compliment her on every little thing. There is nothing too small for you to give a compliment on. And that's going to be our task of the day as well, the proper way to give compliments. We did this before. But words of affirmation, constantly affirming your commitment and your love to your wife. Okay, it's day 23 task. So we spoke about the idea of languages of love. Each person translates love a different way, and we said that's really true. I mean, it's not that each person has their own specific language. Some people's are more prominent than the other, but basically, we're all a mix of all. We all need all of those, and our wives need all of the different ways of showing, of affirming our love and commitment to them. But today's task is going to be to give your wife 3 compliments. I think we kind of did this before, but I want to go back over this again, what a compliment means and how to give a proper compliment. Compliments have to be genuine. You can't tell your wife, oh, you look great, if you don't think she looks great. That's stupid. It's not going to come across right. So number 1, it's got to be genuine. It's got to be complimenting on something that is true, that you really believe. The compliment has to be personal, meaning the compliment has to come from you. It can't just be something in general for somebody else. Wow, it's amazing how you took care of that person. It's got to be for you. And number 3, it has to be detailed. So it has to be, wow, you look great. I love the way your hair is today. It just can't be you look great. It has to be, oh, wow, that was so smart. How you did homework with them so calmly. I don't know how you do it every day. You have a whole full day and then you do homework with the kids. That's really amazing. Has to be detailed, has to be genuine, and it has to be about you. Have a great day.